In this segment, we're going to switch, or we're going to continue rather, and talk about the broader picture, how women's economic empowerment at large can contribute to economic development in itself. And with us to do that, we have two women who have very interesting experiences to share. Noah Meyer, who is behind who is leading the 10,000 Women Initiative of Goldman Sachs that we just saw this very inspiring film about. Her formal title is Vice President Corporate Engagement in Goldman Sachs. And Susan Silbermann, who is Pfizer's Regional Director for Latin America since 2009. And why don't I ask you, like the previous panel, to just say a few words to introduce yourselves. Noah, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I'm the Global Program Director for 10,000 Women at Goldman Sachs. And should I talk a little bit just about what 10,000 Women is? I'll start off with that. So 10,000 Women is an initiative that Goldman launched in 2008. Is there feedback or is it okay? It's a $100 million commitment over 5 years to provide business and management education to women all around the world. And we're reaching women in 43 countries. And to date, we've reached more than 7,500 of the 10,000, which is our goal. So by the end of 2013, we will have reached 10,000, which is a major milestone for us, and we're very thrilled about it. The program works. We work with a network of more than 80 academic and nonprofit partners in the countries in which we're operating. And those partners on the ground provide short-term business and management education to women who are running small or medium-sized businesses that have growth potential. And these are typically underserved women who, but for this opportunity, would not have access to this business education. They go through the programs, which last anywhere from about 3 to 6 months, and then we provide additional support services, so business advising, networks, mentoring, and stay in touch with the women after they graduate. We've been tracking them because we are Goldman Sachs and we like to measure everything we do. We've been tracking them since they've enrolled, and we've seen the women are reporting that 18 months after graduating, 80% have grown their businesses and 66% have hired more employees. I think the data point that's sort of most inspiring for us, though, is that the women are reporting that 9 out of 10 of the women who go through the program are mentoring other women. So not surprising, I see a lot of heads nodding in the room, so most of the people in this room are not surprised to hear that. But it's certainly affirming to have the data that shows how women really invest what they receive back in their communities. And I could go on, but I'm going to stop because I know I won't have anything else to say at the rest of the panel if I keep talking.
You'll get the opportunity
Yes.
to tell us more. Susan, why don't you share a little bit as well?
I'm Susan Silbermann. I've worked for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, a company that's been around for about 160 years. I pretty much started when they did. I've been there actually since I got out of graduate school, and I've had a lot of different opportunities to go all around the world and to do very different things. I got on the board here because I was running actually our Latin American region for the last 4 years. About 3 months ago, I actually changed roles, and now I'm the head of our global vaccines business. So it's actually very interesting to be at a women's conference here. I want to thank Susan and all the folks here. We've been talking about doing something like this for the last couple of years. So I like how she announced it's our first annual conference, and I hope I can be at every one of them no matter what I'm doing. But being in vaccines, I think, is a very interesting space for women because I think I heard from a lot of the earlier panel about what it's like to be a wife and a mother and have children to take care of. We have the world's most successful pediatric vaccine. Why? Because mothers bring their children to be vaccinated. I don't care whether they're working mothers or they're not working mothers. They do not miss the chance to make sure their baby doesn't die from a vaccine-preventable disease. And I think I've learned a lot in what I've done in my previous history at Pfizer and working from a very low-level entry job to the role that I have now about how hard it is for women to balance. Now, I may be a wife, but I'm not a mother. I do have 2 dogs, and I do consider them my children. And I have to take them to the doctor for their shots, too. But I still think that the role that industry has to play in economic development for women is seeing the opportunities to really look in the eyes of your colleagues and make sure that everybody has the same opportunity. Whether you wear pants or you wear a skirt, which used to be you could say that and it always meant men and women. Now it's, I actually get confused at the ladies' rooms now because I look for the dress and I'm not wearing one, so I walk into the men's room. But I think what's important for today and what we're going to talk about, I think, during this panel is the fact that so many of the colleagues that we work with and that are our future employees are women. And they're getting more opportunities. And as we get better at education and some of the other things that I think are important to talk about, we have to make sure that we're creating the environment where everyone can thrive. And part of what we've done at Pfizer is really tried to embrace the idea not just of diversity, because diversity often feels like a numbers game, but inclusion, and to creating an environment within an organization that whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're a mother or your father, whether you're gay or you're straight, whether you're black or you're white, you have a place that you feel like you can bring your whole self to work, and you can be the person that you were meant to be. And that could be a wife and a mother, and it may not be. But the fact is you can achieve the highest level that your skill set will allow you to go. And I think it's interesting when some of the comments that the First Lady made earlier this morning, and also President Bachelet, when you're sort of blazing that trail, you sometimes wonder, did they pick me because I'm a girl, or did they pick me because I'm good? And there's probably no woman in this room that wants to be chosen for a role because we're female. We want to be chosen because we contribute, because we add value. And I'm very proud of some of the diversity statistics that we've created in my former region in Latin America. 46% of our organization is female. Now, when I started in my role, we had one general manager who was female. When I left, we have 4. One of whom is here today, who's our general manager in Argentina. First female general manager in the pharmaceutical industry in Argentina. We have a female general manager in Colombia, which is probably less surprising to people, I think, in terms of there are a lot more, I think, female managers there. We have a female general manager in Chile, which I think is a market that's really growing in terms of women in business. And we have a female general manager in Ecuador, also a very interesting market to have a female general manager. We also had no female finance directors in Latin America. So I think we now have 4. And I brought one of my finance directors from Peru is here with me. My colleagues are here from Mexico. I have colleagues here from New York. I really wanted some of our female colleagues in Latin America to mix with all of you and create that network. And I do think that one of the things, and I know that part of what 10,000 Women program has done, and Noah's going to talk about that, is really created that network. That's sort of the beginning of women supporting women and women growing as leaders in their organizations, not because they're women, but because we're good when we support one another. We're particularly bad when we don't support one another. And I think that one of the things I hope people take out of this conference, sort of that little card, is did I meet someone that I didn't know before that I can talk about what it means to be a leader and to be a female leader in my organization and how I can be a better leader. So I think I'll stop there.
What you just said reminds me of the quote I'm sure you've heard from Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, that there is a special place in hell for women who don't help each other. You work with women's economic empowerment from 2 different angles. One is to help small businesses, small and startup entrepreneurs, women who are working on a smaller scale, to grow their business, to become more professional, like Noah is doing. From I hear from you, Susan, it's about making sure you recruit women into the business and that you give them career opportunities. To go back to start again with the Goldman Sachs initiative, what are the results you see? What does it do, not just to the women in your program, but to the community? And I'm asking this because we've heard this morning about how there are different barriers to women's careers, advancement, life. Cultural barriers, legal barriers, but also, of course, economic barriers. And there is no doubt that the legal and cultural environment plays an important role for the possibilities that women can grab and use and get. But what about if we turn it around and say, what can economic opportunities for a woman do to change the cultural and even the legal environment?
Well, I can talk a little bit about some of the experiences that some of the women who have been through 10,000 Women have had, specifically as it relates, and I think most of the people in this room will be happy to hear that we're in the process of filming some women in Brazil. So the next time you see that video, you'll hear some Portuguese. But the footprint for 10,000 Women in Latin America is pretty expansive. About a quarter of our women will come from Latin America out of the 10,000. Brazil is the country that's most represented. We're in 3 cities, in Rio, in Belo Horizonte, and in Sao Paulo. And we have more than 700 women in Peru in a partnership with the IDB and Pacifico and Thunderbird. And we also have a smaller program, but an interesting program in Mexico with the Tec de Monterrey. So some of the women in our program in Brazil have had a tremendous influence, I think, in the way that the growth that their businesses have experienced since going through the program. One woman I met in Belo was the youngest of 8. Her parents were both farm laborers, illiterate farm laborers, and when she was 10 years old, her father said, okay, you know how to read now, you can drop out of school, you need to go to work. And she really wanted to continue learning, and so she cut a deal with her father and said, if I work to pay my own school fees, will you let me stay in school? And he said, fine, as long as you're paying for it yourself and you're bringing income into the family. So she managed to graduate from high school and ended up working in a series of businesses, but her dream was always to have her own business. Long story about how she ended up getting her own business, but she has a metal manufacturing business now in Belo, she makes bases for tables and chairs and big industrial sinks for hospitals. And she went through the program, and when she enrolled in the program, she had about 10 employees. About 18 months after graduating, she had 20 employees. And a number of those employees are, in fact, family members of hers, people who otherwise would not have any job or employment. And she's become a leader within her family. Another woman in Brazil that we know has another manufacturing business also in Belo, outside of Belo. And her confidence after going through the program, I think, was so transformed that she realized that she had a voice, which I think she, before, I don't think she really had a sense of sort of her power as a woman. And she started organizing other women in her community politically and became a real force, I think, of a political voice on a community level. And that's actually, I think, one of the big themes that we've seen. And it wasn't something, I'm sort of, in some ways, kind of amazed that we didn't spend as much time on this when we were first creating the program, that the confidence piece is really the transformative piece. All of the jobs and all of the revenue that's been generated from the program are amazing because there's this whole multiplier effect that comes out of those benefits. But it all begins with the confidence and the opportunity that these women have had to receive an education, to hear from other women, to build this network, this community, because so many of them operate in isolation in these. And all of a sudden they recognize that not only are they running businesses that can create jobs and opportunities for other people, but they're a force for power within their community. And that we see everywhere, all around the world, not only in Brazil. And it's the constant theme that you hear, whether you're in Nigeria, whether you're in Afghanistan, Brazil, across the world.
Very interesting. I'd just like to insert, in UN Women, where I work, one of our key areas of work is to prevent and end violence against women. And we work on economic and political empowerment. And for us, it's so important to see those together. If a woman cannot earn her own living, be economically independent, how can she walk away from violence, for example? Things are so interrelated. My mother, by the way, told me, and I think many of you have had good mother role models and fathers, she said, don't ever depend on anyone economically, ever. Always be your own woman. I think that's good advice for any daughter. Yes,
piece
please. I was going to give you the floor, Susan.
I think Noah said something that's very important, and to take what Goldman Sachs is doing in a different part of the economic development chain, sort of what we're doing as a private company. A lot of what women lack is it's not necessarily courage. It's sort of we were taught in most cultures to speak when we're spoken to. We were not taught to put our names in right away when the role comes up. And it's a very interesting study. I wish I could remember who authored it, but I'll tell you about it. That matched for a particular job description, sort of stacked the deck with men and women candidates that they knew had exactly the same qualifications. And the job description, there were 10 things on the list you had to be able to do. And they knew that the men and the women candidates each could do 6 of the 10. And so they went to the men and the women and they said, here's the list. Can you tell me if you're interested in the role? And the men said, yeah, I can do 6 of them. The other 4 I'll learn. I'm in. And the women said, I can only do 6 of them. The 4 I can't do. I'm afraid I can't be a part of this job pool. So the divide that we have between feeling like we can't apply for something, we can't put our hands up until we can do everything that's asked, really keeps us from that confidence building that we can do something more than what we've actually already achieved. We can leapfrog, we can learn new things. And women happen to be good at it, but somehow we don't necessarily all believe that we are. And this is obviously gross generalization, so I'm sure it doesn't apply to everybody in the room or every woman in the world, and it probably applies to some men too. But in just looking at gender equity and trying to get there, one of the things that we've started to do as part of Pfizer has a Global Women's Council that I've chaired for the past many years, and one of the things we started to do, we started a program called Raise Your Hand. And the program has these tenets, including mentoring, including getting the skill set that you think you need, and including creating communities, both inside and outside of the company, so that you can build that confidence, so that you know that even if you can only do 5 things on the list, it's important for you to show that you're interested. It's important for you to show that you'd like to get there. And that's how we create role models, and that's how we create models for young women and young men, frankly, to aspire to different positions. But I think it's really fascinating because I think there's a difference in how women approach those kind of things because we just don't feel as confident. We're not ready to hire more employees because we're not sure we're going to be able to feed the family. Whereas probably a male boss in the same situation would have hired the extra employees because he figures he can make more money and then eventually he'll be able to feed the family. So I do think we have to help each other raise our hands. And that's where I think conferences like this really do create a network of friends and colleagues that really can help us see something that we may not see in ourselves.
Can I actually just piggyback on one more? I met a woman in India who had been through the program, and we often go and visit the women individually and sort of try to understand a little bit more about their personal stories. We have a lot of the numbers that they report in, but we really want to understand their stories. And her business, she had come in, I don't know, so I think she had maybe 10 employees, and after 6 months, she still had 10 employees, which is not what we typically like to see. We like to see some growth. So we were interviewing her about it, sort of, why isn't your business grown, or what's going on? She said, I like my business. I like it the way it is. I'm not really interested in seeing it grow anymore. I make enough money. I went to the program so I could make sure I was running a good business. I said, okay. She said, but my husband's business is right across the street. And his business has grown a lot since I've been through the program. And so she went home, and she would go and give him advice about how to improve his business. And it's interesting because that data is not reflected in our numbers, but and that's not the first time I've heard that story. I heard that in Egypt too. I mean, you hear that all around the world. And it's very much this idea that, the women are taking this knowledge and they're sharing it with a lot of other people and really trying to invest in those around them.
Right. Susan, I'd like to follow up a little bit on what you said. What would you say is the responsibility of a major company like Pfizer and others that are multinational, that really that have an impact, whether they want it or not, on the communities where they are and in the countries where they are? What can a company like yours actually do to level the playing field for men and women, to support women, to recruit more women?
Well, I think, it really all is involved in the communities that you work in. And Gina was just telling me about something that we do in Mexico that I wasn't even aware of with young students on creativity and innovation. It really doesn't have anything to do with, per se, pharmaceuticals. But in the end, the industry that we're in is an industry of innovation. R&D, research and development, is all about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about figuring something out that no one else could and taking the next 15 to 20 years to actually make a medicine that might change someone's life. The cycle time's pretty long. I mean, you can't just wake up in the morning and say, I need something for this, and then it'll be there at the end of the quarter. It takes a long time. But in the meantime, we build that strength in that community. We do partnerships with universities. We do partnerships in the science area. One of the areas that obviously as a science-based company we're very involved in is getting more women into math, science, engineering, and technology. You can't do what we do for a living if you don't have scientists. And frankly, since more than 50% of the world's college graduates now are female, if we're not trying to attract female scientists, we're not going to have a business in 50 years. So we do a lot of partnerships. We do a lot of things in the communities. Each of our organizations sort of find what means something to them. It's very hard to be prescriptive when you're in 170 countries around the world. So you need to do what makes sense for the local community that you're in. We do some very interesting things between our division and our animal health division in Brazil, where we do things where it's the Goats for School program or something like that. Like we buy the goat, the family gets a goat, and that way the kids can go to school because the parents can then sell the milk, because otherwise the children weren't going to school because they didn't have the goat. I'm butchering the program because I don't have all the details anymore in my head, but
there's a goat involved.
But there's a goat involved, and there are children that are allowed to go to school because the parents can make money without having to send the children to work. That's really what it is. And I think we do things in different places in different ways because they make the difference in the community. And I like to think, I think you said it before, Kristin, yes, I feel passionate about recruiting women. But there's a trick to recruiting women. If you don't have an environment where they can thrive, they leave. And in fact, there's a great book that I would recommend to all of you called The Loudest Duck by Laura Liswood. And she talks a lot about this area of unconscious bias, which was also brought up this morning by our speakers, about how there's a chapter in the book called We Hire for Differences and We Fire Because They're Not Like Us. So yeah, you want to hire women, it's a great idea. Somebody says you better hire women, there are a lot of women out there. But then if you don't create an environment where they feel comfortable and they can thrive and they can actually have flexible contracts or work hours and I always tell my employees, I don't really care how important it is. If you have to take your child to the doctor, whether you're the mom or the dad, you got to go. The meeting can wait. It'll happen another day. And I think that's important to create that environment where people feel comfortable. So recruiting is only really about a quarter of the story. It's advancing and retaining and making people feel that they're adding value. And I think that's really the trick. And that's what private industry can do in partnership both with other companies, but also with public enterprises and with the communities that we live and we work in.
The 10,000 Women is also a story of partnership, public-private partnerships. You're not doing this alone. You're doing it in partnership with many different partners in the communities where you are. And what does that, is that also part of, what should I say, the bigger results of the program, that it's not just affecting the actual women? What does it do to the community and the partners?
I mean, there's so many different things to say about that, really. I think that that's very true. As I mentioned, we work with a network of more than 80 academic and nonprofit partners, and we also have a number of public-private partnerships all around the world. Most recently, we announced a public-private partnership with the Danish government to partner in Tanzania and in some other countries around Africa to provide capital to women who have been through our program. The Danish government has loan guarantee programs. We also work with the State Department, with the U.S. government, with Ambassador Milan Verveer, who I'm sure many of you know, who's the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues. And we run a program with the State Department and the embassies around the world to identify women in countries where we can't, for a number of reasons, create 10,000 Women programs, and we bring them here. It's the only one example of us bringing women to the U.S. to receive business education. And every other case, we're in the markets, in the local markets. And it's actually been a tremendous experience, an adventure of sorts, to be working in such varying geographies, running a program that's really providing business education across the board. We provide sort of global guidance for how we'd like things to be implemented, but women business owners in Afghanistan look very different than women business owners in China. and how we're able to adapt and work with our local partners to really localize the curriculum, the selection process, the support services we offer, the strengths. You know, women in Brazil, for example, wanted more time on finance than women in India did. They were much more, they demanded basically twice the curricular hours on finance than women in other parts of the world. And so our ability to be flexible and work with our partners is important. But one of the most interesting, I think, takeaways from us about this sort of community of partnership is what our partners have told us about what this program offers them in their communities. We work with some of the leading academic institutions around the world, and there's the most elite in many of their countries. And many of them, by their own description, don't necessarily have the opportunity to engage diversity of constituents within their populations. And 10,000 Women is a program that really is identifying women who have never before had the opportunity to go to an American university in Cairo, which is an elite institution, or the Indian School of Business, which is an elite institution, or FGV in Sao Paulo, which is an elite institution. And a number of the deans and the sort of senior leadership at the school at these schools were really excited about the prospect of having a program that really enabled them to engage in a broader community within their countries, and to bring women to campus who might not otherwise have it. And in some ways, we think about this as sort of the democratization of business education, right? The opportunity to swing open the doors at a lot of places. And these schools, the leadership at these schools can't get enough of it. I mean, they absolutely love it. And the student body, I think, it's really positively affected by it.
Probably brings a lot of new perspectives to
Absolutely.
the business schools themselves.
Yeah.
I would like to open it up now for questions from all of you. I see an arm in purple, a purple arm down there.
My name is Jessica Soto.
You'll get a microphone, just a second. I think there's a microphone.
I didn't see it.
Oh, hi, thank you. There's also a question behind the purple. Yeah, you go first down there and then you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Soto. I'm from Peru, and actually I am one of the women that's been benefited by the 10,000 Women program.
Ah.
So thank you very much. It's totally true that it's life-changing. I made a lot of bonds and connections with a lot of businesswomen in my country that helped me a lot. And my question will be, after you reach the goal of 10,000 women, do you have a second, like like an update or
I've never gotten that question before. Well, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so glad you're here. This was not planned. This is so exciting. We'll talk later.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not making any big announcements here about what we're going to do next, but the program has been very well received. It's by both the beneficiaries, certainly our scholars, within the firm. You know, this is a program that Goldman Sachs, that from the senior most leadership all the way down, is a program that people have really embraced in kind of a magical way. I don't think anybody really expected that it would captivate people's imaginations in the way that it has. And in fact, I'm proud to say that it inspired a domestic program, 10,000 Small Businesses, which is for men and women here in the U.S. and in the U.K. Given its success and just, I don't know, just it's a smart model and it works. People really, it does change people's lives. So there's an enormous amount of interest and enthusiasm in seeing the program continue, and we do expect it to continue. But I imagine that it will continue in a little bit of a different form. We've learned so much in these, 5 years that we've been operating, that we will take a lot of those lessons and sort of move to the next level. I think the past 5 years we've seen this. All of us have seen this. How the attention to women and girls has just heightened in the international arena. You know, the Clinton Global Initiative has a track dedicated exclusively to women and girls. There was just, Nick Kristof and Cheryl Dunn wrote Half the Sky, which just ran on PBS. UN Women. I mean, just everybody. There's UN Women. Exactly, UN Women. I mean, there's just so much happening, and people were talking before about the tipping point moment. We've tipped. I mean, we are over that moment, and there's just so much momentum, and there's this movement that has really, I think, taken hold. And so I think we are proud to be a part of that, and we will definitely continue. But it'll probably look a little different, but a continuation on the same theme.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask you that question too, but now that was that. Thank you. Now to our next question.
Hi, is it on? Hi, Carolina Costa. I'm with McClory Associates in Washington, D.C. We're a strategic advisory firm, and many of our clients are engaged on women issues. One in particular is Walmart. They have a wonderful program called Women 360. I would highly recommend everyone to check it out. It's really, it's amazing, it's remarkable. At any rate, my question to both of you is, as you engage in these programs for women economic empowerment, and you engage with strategic partnerships, how do you view the role of government in local government, country governments, and what are the challenges and opportunities?
I think it's a great question, and having worked throughout Latin America and other parts of the world, in many countries there's a minister of gender parity or a minister of equal opportunity, and it's fascinating because certainly, except for the ambassador at large, we haven't had that ever in the United States as far as I'm concerned. But it's a great way to walk in the door. I think from a private industry perspective, the big problem is turnover. So governments they tend to last 4, 5, 6 years, depending. And unless there's a commitment that transcends political parties, it's hard sometimes for those government programs to stay in place. And we do a lot of work with government as a healthcare industry. I've never met any member of any Latin American government where healthcare wasn't in the top 3 priorities, ever. And healthcare actually has a lot to do with women, because often women are the major providers of healthcare decisions, healthcare expenses, healthcare management in a family. So it will be a natural thing for us to connect on the women's parity, women's opportunity. Again, science education, math education, especially for young girls. The big issue sometimes is when that person's mandate ends, is the next person going to come in? They're going to keep healthcare as a priority, but are they going to see it through that same lens? So from a private enterprise perspective, like I said, we've been around 160 years. We've been around almost over 60 years in some countries in Latin America. It's our oldest international operations in the world. And where the governments really commit to that, we're happy to stay committed, but sometimes that's the part that's hard. Sometimes it's a toss of a coin.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we have a number of public-private partnerships, and I think that one of the reasons that we've dedicated a significant amount of attention to really cultivating those is because we recognize the work that we're doing in particular is, it requires everybody to work in partnership. We can't do this by ourselves. Government can't do it by themselves. And these academic institutions and the nonprofits with which we work, the civil society in which we work, there's no way that they can do it by themselves. So how it is that we create the right alliances and partnerships to do that, I think makes it sort of critical to our ability to operate and to be successful. I think it also, to some degree, depends on the country in which we're operating. In a country like China, working with the government, you can't really get a lot of work done unless you're working with the government. And so we have a partnership with the All China Women's Federation, which is the government entity for women's issues, which has been hugely important. But not only with the All China Women's Federation, we also work with the equivalent of eBay in China. Sort of figuring out how it is that you create the right partnerships and alliances so that you can have the maximum amount of impact. In other countries in which we operate, working with the governments is not quite as critical, or it can engender some, I don't want to say suspicion, but a little bit of apprehension on the part of the women who go through our program. So we really have to be strategic and deliberative in the different places in which we operate.
Let me add another part of the public-private partnership, and that can be the UN. One of our roles as UN Women, for example, is to work on the enabling environment, talking to the ministries of finance, the ministers of justice, the parliamentarians, to look at how is the legal environment, what needs to change in terms of laws, in terms of also understanding the importance of women's economic participation, for example. It may be not enough to partner with the Ministry of of Equality. You need to get the Minister of Finance to see the point, or to come on board. More questions from the audience? Yes, I see an arm down there.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Rojas. Thank you so much for participating. This is very helpful and eye-opening. I work full-time for the government, but on the part-time, I started up an organization to help Latin American women succeed professionally with tools. And I guess my question is, there are many factors of government helping women succeed, and also there's other factors such as providing infrastructure, education. But what is the role of men in this big equation? Like, what can they do? Like, the world is made of men and women, like 50-50. And so, I mean, in my full-time job, I'm the only girl. I've been the only girl for every single job I've ever had. And I mean, it's challenging, but what would you guys advise first for us to do to teach them what they need to be doing? Because sometimes they're not even aware of. And second, what is their role in this whole big picture? Thank you.
Big question there. Susan?
I mean, I have to admit that it's rare for any of us, certainly I'll speak for myself, to be in a room like this. Because it's never like this. And I have to say something. There's one male colleague here. It's a colleague of mine from Pfizer. Robert Simpson has been supporting me in my Latin American role for many years. I've dragged him to many events similar to this. And you've got to find people like Robert. Enlightened men that see the world in a different way. Let's give Robert a hand. I'll just tell you the story of the Women's Council when it started. It was all women. And I realized we weren't getting our message across because we were talking to each other. And we love talking to each other, obviously. That's why I said to Susan, women's conferences always run over. But the fact of the matter is men still make up a good chunk of the workforce. And if we aren't having the conversation with men, it's not like they created a problem and we have to solve it. Because it's everybody's issue that there are not enough women participating in business, in politics, in education, in science. And if we don't engage men to help us find that equilibrium, we'll never get there. We'll have meetings like this, and we'll share stories, and we'll swap business cards, and we'll talk about shoes and stuff like that, but we'll never really make a dent. And so the trick for me in the Women's Council, when things really started to move, is when we put men on the council. Now, it wasn't any man. You couldn't just pick one. But you had to have men that really believed that they were going to help make this difference. Sometimes it's men with daughters. That's just a trick to keep in the back of your mind. Because no father wants to think that their daughter doesn't have every opportunity in the world. All of us are daughters of somebody. And our fathers probably wanted us to be in this room today and to have the opportunities that we have. And so I really believe that if we don't find the men that can be engaged, and there are men that will be engaged, we won't change it. So I know that the First Lady's husband is particularly engaged on this issue, or she wouldn't have been able to do what she's been able to do. And I really think we have to find political leaders, business leaders, social society leaders, males, that really believe that this is going to change the world. And that's why I think Half the Sky is a tremendous novel and a tremendous documentary and a tremendous story. Because if we don't look at the other half, if we just sit there and cross our arms and say, make it better for me, it's just not going to happen. But you have to find the right ones. And Robert is one of many I've found in my company that actually are there sitting with us to try and help make a difference.
Well, I actually have a story, this is a perfect segue. It's actually about the wrong kind of man doing the right kind of thing. So it's a story about a family in Afghanistan. We worked with a woman who ran a program in Afghanistan called Kandahar Treasures, where she would go around to women in different provinces and collect crafts that women had made, and then she would sell them. These are women who couldn't leave their homes. And then she would come back and she would give them the proceeds. And one woman that she worked with was in Bamyan province, which is obviously a very conservative province. And the woman told her a story about, this woman had 3 daughters. And her husband came to her one day. Her husband, who was very, very, very traditional, came to her and said, I've heard about these schools that they've started for girls. I think they're a terrible idea. But you know what, since you're bringing a little money in, what do you think? And she, obviously, I think really wanted her daughters to go to school, but she was very smart about it. She said, I think educating girls is a terrible, terrible idea. But if you educate them, they'll be able to bring in money for you too. And he said, you're right. I will force them to go to school. So, I think that in many ways that story sort of talks about the power of, Kristin, it sort of brings back to the advice your mother gave you, right? Which is economic independence is really the key, and how it is that, whether it's getting people like your colleague who are open-minded and sort of understand the importance of getting engaged in these issues, or whether if it requires a little bit more, tricky steps to try to convince somebody who's a little bit less open-minded, I think it's certainly sort of a critical piece. In 10,000 Women, one of the things that our program partners do is they bring in the husbands of the women who go through the program in many of the countries in which we're operating, in many of the African countries, because they recognize that many of these husbands are not that comfortable with the idea that their wives are, first of all, going to be out of their homes studying for long periods of time, and that they're investing so much more in their businesses. And one of our program directors in Nigeria, in Lagos, talked about how you need to get the husbands really behind this idea so they don't feel threatened by the investment that's being made in their wives. And we've seen on a number of occasions, not a few, that the businesses that these women are running become so successful that the men leave what they're doing and go to work with their wives, with their wife is really their boss. So it's an interesting development.
Thank you both for sharing these extraordinary experiences and views and insights. I'd like to conclude, I'd like to ask each one of you to tell us, what is the one thing you would like us to take away from what you've shared with us?
I think I said it at the beginning. I think the goal of meetings like this, in my mind, is to bring people together for sort of this very special and noteworthy moment, to share experiences and ideas, and for each of us, no matter what we do, no matter where we work, to write down on one of those pieces of paper that the team has given us, what's the one thing you're going to do when you go back to your day job that's going to change your organization to make women feel more included, more valued, and what one woman are you going to meet here today that you're going to stay in touch with, and so you can help each other. So I think those are two great things. If you do just one of those two things, and as President Bachelet said, then take the piece of paper, fold it up, put it in an envelope, and write open in November, December, January, February, March, April. April, what's today, the 11th? Open on April 11th, 2013, and test yourself to see if you've done it.
I would say, one of the things that has been so eye-opening for us, given the results of all the women that we work with, is how much their businesses have grown. As I mentioned before, 80% have grown their businesses and 66% have hired more employees. And I don't think it's any coincidence that these women are, for the first time, in a network in a community of exclusively women working together. I think their businesses have grown directly because they have relationships that they didn't necessarily have access to previously. And so, to my mind, the power of the network, and it's many ways a continuation on the point that you just made, which is how important it is for women to support other women, for women to talk to other women, because you never know where those conversations are going to lead. In the case of 10,000 Women, they often lead to new job opportunities, employment opportunities, just growth for these women, which has this incredible effect. And in the case of many of the people in this room, it's, I'm sure there are similar types of things that could happen. So I think that investing in networks and bringing women together is something that I can't be underestimated.
Thank you so much, both of you. And on this day of the girl, the first day of the girl, we were all once little girls. Today we're here as grown-up women, and let's think about how we can bring the girls of today one step further than what we have ourselves become. Thank you all. Thank you both.